goal of this series is really to think about what the multilateral system could do on the critical question of improving agricultural sustainability, but to do it in a way that doesn't get enmeshed in or interrupt some of the critical ongoing negotiations that are going on at the WTO on areas like agricultural subsidies or public stockholding. We consider those areas to be hugely important, and like everyone, we're hoping consensus outcomes emerge in those. But at least from the GTP side, and we will have FAO colleagues here to speak from their side as well, we think the issue of sustainability is simply too pressing to pursue. Exclusively too pressing to pursue. So we should be looking exclusively at what be done across the entire multilateral system, done across the entire multilateral system. Governments outcomes to support businesses. Governments proving the sustainability of their agricultural fishery practice. Today's dialogue will begin with some opening remarks. From Mr. FAO's Geneva office, who is the director of FAO's Geneva office. Derek Carnegie. Then we will turn to Derek Carnegie, a consultant who has authored the paper that forms an. I think that's very much in GTP. I think that's very much in as policy organizations. But at the other hand is policy focused. But at the other hand is phenomenal research institution. So Derek is helping us to straddle both of those worlds, and we are tremendously grateful to him for joining us. We will then turn to our illustrious panel, two of which are joining us online, but with us in physical space, we have Ambassador Mai Ly of Vietnam, the permanent representative of Vietnam to the WTO and the UN institutions. Welcome, Ambassador. And Facundo Calvo, who is an agricultural policy analyst at IISD. And then joining us, looming over us like vengeful gods from above, are Dr. Edwini Kessi, who is the director of the Agricultural and Commodities Division of the WTO, as well as the head of its delivery unit, which sounds like a very challenging but exciting job indeed. Welcome, Dr. Kessi. And we have with us as well Babakar Bender Hassan, the director of the Markets and Trade Division of the FAO, who's joining us live from Rome. Thank you so much for joining us as well. Assuming I do my job as moderator halfway competently, we should have some time for question and answer, and we will try to take questions both from the floor and from those of you joining us online. For those of you joining us in person, when I call for questions, raise your hand and one of our lovely assistants will bring you a microphone. We beg for questions rather than comments instead of questions, but we will take what we can get. For those of you joining us online, you can pose your questions at any time using the Q&A box at the bottom of your Zoom window. And when it comes to Q&A, I will pass over to our FAO colleague, Geir-Ul, who will select a few questions and read them to our panel in his dulcet Norwegian tones. With that, and a final thank you to our excellent team and to the FAO who have helped us put this on, as well as to the supporters of Geneva Trade Week, the Geneva Chamber of Commerce, the Graduate Institute, and the Australian government. Please allow me to hand the podium over to Dominique Bourgeon. Please, sir, the floor is yours.
Well, good afternoon. Very happy to be here. Thank you, Dmitry. Excellencies, colleagues, dear participants, I'm delighted to be here today, and together with our partner, the Geneva Trade Platform, welcome you to this first dialogue organized by FAO and the Geneva Trade Platform in a series of events which we will have towards the end of the year. So as was said, I'm Dominique Bourgeon. I'm the director of the liaison office here in Geneva. Very pleased to be here. As you know, FAO is about eradicating hunger. It's about eradicating rural poverty, promote social development, and sustainably manage natural resources. Talking of food security, as you all know, we are obviously not on track. Both chronic food insecurity and acute food insecurity are increasing. When you look at chronic food insecurity, I mean, the trend has been reversed since 2015, 2016. We are now at over between 720 and 828 million people living with chronic food insecurity. This means that we are definitely not on track when it comes to the SDG 2. We might end up, if we continue like that, with 670 million people still facing chronic hunger in 2030. On the acute food insecurity side, which is the type of food insecurity that can lead to famine, the situation is really extremely concerning. We have over 200 million people in acute food insecurity today in about 50 countries, with about 500,000 people as we speak in famine condition, more than 500,000 people in famine situation as we speak now. So situation is extremely worrisome. So this means that we need to transform the food system, among other things, of course. This is only one part of the equation, but we need to transform the food system to make it more resilient, inclusive, sustainable, and efficient. And this is really at the core of what we are trying to promote, to make such more resilient, inclusive, sustainable, and efficient food system at the core of what, together with our partners, we are promoting. This is done through a number of what we call transformation pathways that have to deal with the humanitarian development peace nexus, that have to deal with making our food system more climate resilient, to strengthen the economic resilience, to transform our food consumption patterns, and of course to address two of the main underlying causes of food insecurity, which are related to poverty, high poverty, and high inequalities, which are of course very important. Within that, and I mean, those things are really at the core of the FAO strategic framework, which we have for the period 2022-2031, which is articulated really around how can FAO best support its member to achieve the SDGs, articulated around what we call the 4 betters, better production, better nutrition, better environment, for better life, leaving no one behind, which is really the core, the sort of motto of the way the strategic framework of FAO is articulated. Within that, it is clear that we recognize the importance of trade. Trade is absolutely fundamental in achieving food insecurity and for the transformation of agri-food system. Trade rules in that respect are absolutely fundamental and are instrumental in achieving a well-functioning global agri-food system. Nutritious food must be made available to people across the world as quickly and as timely and safely matter from their place of origin. In that respect, it is clear that we were pleased at FAO to see that there were quite significant achievements that were achieved at the last ministerial conference of WTO, MC12, which was held in June, and which obviously brought a suite of outcomes in several important areas. Particularly, we were pleased to see that the membership conclude this long-awaited WTO agreement on fisheries subsidies, and that there has been progress also on a number of other tracks. Through the dialogue series, which we are starting today, we hope to contribute, as Dimitri was saying, to informing discussions. We know that there is an appetite on the side of the members to indeed have negotiation restarting, and within our role as FAO, how can we inform those discussions? And the key topic of today, of course, this nexus, agriculture, trade, and sustainability, is obviously very important for various reasons, and one that is attracting a lot of interest. Of course, we see that within our role as FAO in trade, which is where we are not engaged, of course, in negotiations, but where we have a role in providing the evidence, in offering a forum for exchange of ideas and opportunities, and then a role in terms of capacity development, which is also very important today. So what Obviously, it's important for us is to know that this is, as I said, the first dialogue of a series, which we'll organize this year. And the purpose of the event today is to set the scene and provide an overall perspective on the current state of play in the intersection between trade, agriculture, and sustainability. And we are confident that the eminent, as you said, Dimitri, panel, which we have today, will provide a lot of useful information that will indeed, as I said, feed policy dialogues. And we look forward to future opportunities to indeed engage with you and play our role in informing your discussion. So with that, I thank you and I wish you a fruitful discussion. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dominique. And I think that the way you position the FAO's role in these discussions as obviously seeking transformation, but ultimately doing it by informing and building the capacity of the discussions rather than steering them in any one direction is very much the way that the Geneva Trade Platform sees its role in this conversation as well. We very much, our North Star is that as long as everyone is informed and fully able to participate in these high-level conversations, then our role is finished. And where delegates like Ambassador Mai take the discussions beyond that is very much out of our hands, but we try to contribute where we can. In that spirit of informing the negotiations, the discussions, the conversation, it's my pleasure to invite Derek Carnegie to the stage. He has been toiling for months on a report into the state of play exactly as Dominique described. What is the state of play? What might be possible? Is there ways to move things forward beyond the traditional issues? Derek, if you could, the floor is yours. The clicker, we pray, works.
Thank you very much, Dimitri, and good afternoon to all of you here and connected virtually. To introduce myself briefly first, I'm an economist working on productivity, competitiveness, and trade issues and development, previously at the OECD and the International Trade Center, among a number of other organizations. Though I'm listed as the lead author on this report, this was very much a group effort, and I'm extremely grateful for the support of the GTP and the FAO in providing direction and contributing to this report. The report briefly outlines how the multilateral trading system sets out incentives. Hope that's a little better. How the multilateral trading system sets out incentives that affect sustainable development in agriculture and focuses on some of the challenges created. It then suggests some possible routes forward for addressing these issues. Today, I'll just provide a brief summary of some of the report's main messages. There's, of course, a number of bodies at the WTO whose work is highly relevant for agriculture. To highlight just a couple of those here, the Agreement on Agriculture, of course, being the main agreement that shapes agricultural trade, as well as other issues covered by its three pillars of market access, domestic support, and export competition. Its implementation is overseen by the Committee on Agriculture, and further negotiations take place through the special session. Agricultural value chains and sustainability in these value chains in particular are also affected by the work of the Committee on Trade and Environment and through associated initiatives such as the informal dialogue on plastics pollution. Beyond the WTO councils and committees, talks such as the trade and environmental sustainability structured discussions are particularly relevant, as they regularly touch on issues that are quite relevant to agriculture, such as the environmental impact of domestic support for the sector and the backing of voluntary sustainability with international standards. Finally, fisheries, the topic of recent notable progress in the multilateral arena, progress through the Agreement on Fishery Subsidies, which are work to limit or eliminate support for certain fishing activities. To take a brief aside from the topic of trade and look at agriculture and the environment, when we're looking at sustainability issues in agriculture, it's relevant to discuss this both in terms of the sector's impact on the environment, but also its vulnerability to environmental risks. In the former, we might be looking at greenhouse gas emissions from agriculture, which account for about 1/6 of total global emissions. This figure here, if you can see it well enough, provides a breakdown of where these originate from in the agriculture sector. That much of this comes from deforestation or for the expansion of farmland, and from enteric fermentation through the digestive processes of cattle and other ruminants. Looking at the latter aspect, the second aspect of environment and agriculture, in terms of the effects of environmental change on agricultural productivity. Climate change, of course, means that investment is needed in adaptation, in adaptation to growing conditions that are changing, and increased risk of extreme weather events, among other challenges. So what are some of the trade issues that affect the development of agriculture within these confines of sustainability? Broadly, we might look in particular at the effects of rules on subsidies and market access. That, depending on their design and context, domestic support measures can have negative environmental impacts particularly through encouraging input misuse, through poor alignment of crops to growing conditions such as climate or water availability, and through overproduction that can be environmentally harmful, as well as having distortive effects on international prices. Market access, of course, is also increasingly shaped by non-tariff measures. In agriculture, this is especially through sanitary and phytosanitary measures and through technical barriers to trade. Just as an illustration of that fact, this is a figure showing the number of reported measures on agricultural products since 1995 and the entry into force of the Agreement on Agriculture. Over this time period, agricultural products have accounted for over 80% of SPS measures and close to 40% of TBT measures that have been initiated. While many NTMs are, of course, designed to address legitimate policy concerns in different areas of public policy, they can also act as regulatory barriers to trade, often in particular affecting agricultural and agri-food products. This review that's outlined in the report implies a number of priorities to be addressed to foster sustainable development in global agriculture. These include improving the measurement of carbon footprints in agriculture and in agricultural value chains. It includes as well addressing market access rules with consideration of environmental costs as well. Fostering trade in environmental goods becomes a priority as well, along with strengthening environmental regulations and standards, reforming domestic support programs to limit their environmental costs, as was just mentioned, and also finally strengthening the capacities of farmers and agricultural systems to improve competitiveness in trade, to limit their environmental impacts, and to adapt to some of these environmental risks. The report notes potential avenues for addressing these priorities, and to just outline these in very broad terms, the first would refer to or relate to pursuing solutions within the WTO, within multilateral trade rules, which at the moment would include gradual work through plurilateral discussions, as well as addressing some of the more tractable issues within the Committee on Agriculture, such as on transparency and reporting, as the cost of notification is a particular concern to many developing countries. Second, although regional trade agreements are typically second best solutions that risk diverting rather than creating trade, they can also allow for progress among like-minded countries. Increasingly, regional trade agreements also include environmental provisions that are relevant to sustainability in agriculture. Associated with this, this means that regional trade agreements also provide opportunities for learning across groups of RTA members. Finally, two more categories, moving beyond strictly looking at trade and the potential of looking strictly at trade rules to the potential of international cooperation and domestic reform. That, especially given the increased importance of non-tariff measures, there's much that can be done in strengthening compliance with mandatory and voluntary standards among producers and exporters. There's cooperation or space for cooperation on improved coordination as among development partners as well. And the fourth main category of opportunity for progress identified is that of building production capacities of producers and small businesses across value chains through development assistance and through domestic reform that will help to foster sustainable and inclusive growth in agriculture. Of course, the full report includes some further details on these main messages and these recommendations. And thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you so much, Derek. The paper will be released shortly, and of course, we do encourage you to read it in its full length, detail, and glory, as that was very much a summary. Thank you very much, Derek. We now come to the bulk of our session today, the panel, and I wanted to get us started by turning to Rome. I don't think it diminishes Derek's work at all to say that in writing this piece, he somewhat stood on the shoulders of giants, in the sense that there has been an absolute rush of fantastic publications coming out of the FAO in Rome, and a lot of really good research, and really, I think, potentially actionable research in these areas coming from Rome. So I wanted to turn to you, sir, Mr. Ben-Halcyon, to ask what is the FAO's perspective? What has your research and your findings and your observations found about both the imperative to improve on some of these issues multilaterally, but also where some of the potential may lie?
Thank you, Dimitri. I hope you hear me well.
We do.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. And it's a pleasure for me to participate in this event organized by the Geneva Trade Platform in partnership with our office, the FAO Liaison Office in Geneva, and to discuss FAO's views on how trade can drive the sustainability agenda forward, help members achieve the zero hunger goal, and support the realization of the 2030s agenda vision. First, we need to acknowledge the significant food security challenges of our times, as was already highlighted by my dear colleague Dominique in his opening remarks. Conflicts and geopolitical tensions, extreme and frequent climatic events, economic shocks, disruption caused by the COVID-19 pandemic, and increasing inequality have created significant challenges and are putting our world food security into jeopardy. The numbers speak for themselves. I will repeat very quickly what probably Dominique has already mentioned to give a context from my following intervention. Our latest estimates show that up to 828 million people were chronically hungry in 2021, a number that has been increasing for the last 5 years. And it is also projected that in 2030, we could see 670 million people suffering from chronic undernourishment should no appropriate action be undertaken. Furthermore, 222 million people are projected to face high levels of acute food insecurity across 53 countries this year in 2022. It's clear that we are not on track to meet the zero hunger goal by 2030 under the current trends. Much more needs to be done at all levels, and we must accelerate progress using the tools and mechanisms available to us. In this regard, trade is a very important tool. It is recognized as one of the key means of implementation for Agenda 2030 and the SDGs. However, as the speaker or on the presentation of the paper highlighted, a question that always arises is about the linkages between trade and the sustainability agenda and what impacts trade or expansion in trade can have on sustainability. The United Nations defines sustainability as, and I quote, meeting the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. According to FAO, a sustainable food system is one that delivers food security and nutrition for all in such a way that the economic, social, and environmental dimensions to generate food security and nutrition for future generations are not compromised. This means that agri-food system should ensure economic sustainability, have broad-based benefits for society, and also a positive or neutral impact on the natural resource base. Trade affects all three dimensions of sustainability, However, its impacts are complex and can create trade-offs with respect to achieving the sustainability objectives. And here I will mention a few examples. For instance, with respect to economic sustainability, trade can increase the market size with increased opportunities for farmers and small and medium-sized enterprises to participate in international markets and global value chains, promote knowledge and technology transfer, become more competitive, and consequently boost productivity and economic growth. However, trade can have adverse impacts on those producers in import competing sectors, many with limited access to assets, to services, credit, and other resources. Likewise, with regard to environmental sustainability, trade can contribute to both climate change adaptation and mitigation efforts. For instance, it can help countries address production disruption or shortfalls related to climate shocks, such as natural disaster or what we are seeing these days in terms of floods in Pakistan and drought or protracted the drought in the Horn of Africa. Trade also enables the optimal allocation of resources globally, thus contributing to more efficient production systems and lower greenhouse gas emission. On the other hand, economic gains from exporting or expansion in exports may lead to intensification of production, overproduction, and practices that have adverse environmental impacts. Regarding social sustainability, trade can foster positive social outcomes with improvement in inclusivity and equity. Yet, in the absence of appropriate regulations, trade can also contribute to undesirable outcomes. For example, increased marginalization of the poor, gender discrimination, and the violation of labor standards and labor rights. Now comes the second question: what can be done to promote the attainment of sustainable agri-food systems within a trade policy framework? We must keep in mind that trade policies alone cannot provide an instrument to address the complex sustainability issues. We need complementary measures that can ensure policy coherence across a broad range of areas, including trade, agriculture, environment, health, technology, and education, to mention a few, and address the trade-offs. For instance, we need to ensure that trade liberalization is accompanied by appropriate social protection measures for those adversely affected by import competition. We need public investment in rural infrastructure, research and development, and extensions to overcome the structural barriers affecting productivity and market access. And we need policies for land tenure and labor, with special attention given to gender consideration and youth. Coherent processes that can identify and implement win-win solutions also need to be inclusive. This is why engagement of all stakeholders for collective action on sustainability and international cooperation is fundamental. The goal is to create a conducive environment, both at the national and global levels, that would make food systems more efficient, inclusive, resilient, and sustainable. In this regard, a transparent and predictable multilateral trading system under the WTO is essential to reinforce the positive role that trade can play in transforming agri-food systems. For example, when it comes to the global environmental externality, such as greenhouse gases and climate change, only a multilateral approach will be effective with lasting results. Let me now say a few words about the role of FAO in this complex context. FAO contributes to the enabling environment for more effective and collective action at the global, regional, and national level by providing data and information, analysis, standards, and norms, by strengthening capacities and providing technical assistance or capacity development to countries, by promoting and facilitating effective multi-stakeholder partnerships, and by providing policy support and advice. FAO plays an important role in fostering transparency in agriculture markets and trade through initiatives like early warning systems and market intelligence. For example, by hosting the G20 Agriculture Market Information System, which is a a platform to enhance market transparency and coordination of policy responses. FAO supports members in strengthening their capacities to make trade work for better food systems. This is achieved through the provision of courses and training in multiple languages at country and regional levels. FAO also leads a range of programs and approaches that have a distinct focus on addressing various dimensions of sustainability. For example, promoting gender equality in value chains, labor rights, or supporting the protection of natural resources. Furthermore, FAO produces a vast array of analytical products to provide evidence and promote knowledge sharing on issues affecting food and agriculture markets and trade and their linkages with food security and sustainability. These include our flagship report, The State of Agriculture Commodity Markets, or SOCO, which this year was dedicated to the theme of the geography in food and agriculture trade and policy approaches for sustainable development. We also produce analytical studies and reports, technical papers, policy briefs, and numerous other knowledge products to support countries and inform policy-making processes. It is in this framework that I would like, on behalf of FAO, to commend the partnership between our office, our liaison office in Geneva, and the Geneva Trade Platform of the Graduate Institute of International and Development Studies. In FAO, we believe that this joint project, which aims to explore and identify concrete ideas on how the multilateral trading system would support achieving the sustainability objective in agriculture and fishery, will offer an important contribution to the global efforts. Year 2030 is approaching very rapidly, and only by working together can we achieve our common goals. With this, I thank you again for the opportunity to intervene and to share with you our views on how trade can contribute to the sustainability agenda, and hopefully we can build on this event to support countries in achieving their goals and the 2030 agenda and the Sustainable Development Goals, or the SDGs. Thank you for your kind attention.
Thank you so much. I think that was quite a comprehensive look, in that your intervention went through the scale of the challenge, some of the natures of the challenge, through to some of what might be needed in a global sense, some of the flanking policies that are traditionally thought of as domestic policies that might sort of support that might support overcoming those challenges, and areas where those domestic policies will require flanking support from the international trading system, the multilateral system, through to what I think was a very useful enunciation of some of what the FAO does. The FAO is around these issues. The FAO is, of course, a part of the multilateral system. It is not necessarily a rule maker in the way the WTO is on trade, but you laid out a laundry list of fantastic contributions that the FAO is able to make every day to overcoming these challenges, which I think is inspiration and food for thought for how organizations like the WTO and the rest of the multilateral system can also contribute to these questions. So I thank you very much, as well as for the kind words about this collaboration. We're very excited and honored by it as well. So thank you again. And I think that last point of what might be possible and what might be desirable brings us naturally to our next speaker. Ambassador Mai, Vietnam has at least for the last decade, I think, been a leader in trade policy innovation in the region, and I think it's fair to say globally. The Vietnamese government has looked at ways it can use trade policy to advance policy goals across its agenda. And having heard these introductions, having thought about these issues, I wonder if you could share some of where Vietnam feels there might be desirable paths forward on these issues. It's on.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me at this event. And from Vietnam, I would like to share the policies of Vietnam and our perspective relating to the multilateral options to promote sustainable agriculture. So I would like to share 4 main points. First, I totally agree with other speakers on the importance of international trade in promoting agriculture, in promoting the achievement of SDG. Second, agricultural sector play an important role in Vietnam, including poverty alleviation, achievement of many of the MDGs, and realization of the SDG in line with Agenda 2030. Third, appropriate domestic policies inconsistent with international commitments play important role for agricultural sector development, as well as our national socio-economic development and towards achievement of SDG. And then I would like to share about looking forward what Vietnam views, how Vietnam views the multilateral options. So, as you know, Vietnam is among the most open economies with a trade to GDP ratio of 190% in 2018 and over 200% in 2020 amid the COVID-19 pandemic. To date, Vietnam has signed and engaged in 15 free trade agreements, and including new generation FTAs. International trade plays an important role in Vietnam's socio-economic development. So Vietnam, as a developing country, and 70% of the population in rural area, from a LDC status, not having sufficient food. Now we can provide food for our own population and also contribute to global food security. And our domestic policies, inconsistent with international commitments, play important role. And for the past years, in order to gain great achievements in agriculture and socio-economic development, we have 3 important policy groups I would like to mention here. First is infrastructure investment policies in agriculture for construction, renovation in irrigation system, and on-field roads to serve agricultural production, as well as support for use of public irrigation products and services. Second is production support policies related to supporting the seeds and agricultural materials to restore production after natural disasters and epidemics. As you know, Vietnam is among the few countries which are most seriously affected by climate change. So we also support consultancy and certification of safety products according to standards. In addition, a number of other policies related to credit for agriculture and high technology application all are in line with the commitments under the WTO. The third policy group is policy to attract enterprises to invest in agriculture. Most recently, for effective realization of our strong commitments to SDGs, as well as adaptation to climate change, new strategy has been adopted and is being implemented for promoting sustainable agriculture, the topic we are discussing today. Vietnam announced a target to achieve net zero by 2050. As you know, during the COP26 World Leaders Summit last year. And in July this year, Vietnam issued its national climate change strategy towards 2050. In January this year, our government also adopted the strategy for sustainable agriculture and rural development for the period from 2021-2030 with a vision to 2050, focusing on 3 pillars: ecological agriculture, vibrant countryside, innovative farmers. This strategy sets the orientation for agricultural policies in the coming years to develop efficient and sustainable agriculture. On the other hand, our strategy on merchandise export-import by 2030, adopted this year in April, also set the objective to ensure sustainable development. So just to confirm that our government is strongly committed to implementing the SDGs. Regarding commitments under the agricultural agreement under the WTO, we have fulfilled the obligations to provide agricultural notifications and is currently promoting procedures to provide notification for the period for the current period. And now looking forward, I would like to emphasize that Vietnam supports multilateral options to promote agricultural sustainability. And a few points can be shared here. First, we support initiatives to expand agricultural trade opportunities. Second, we urge WTO members not to create intransparent protection mechanism or any measures that may distort trade. And you know that several measures are distorting the trade and harmful for the consumers, also harmful for the SDG and the development. Third point, we are ready to engage in agricultural negotiations on special safeguard mechanism and public stockholding for food security purposes. But this negotiation must not create trade distortion of one trade of agricultural products, neither affect the food security or other WTO members, nor Vietnam. And as you know that our view is that negotiation at the WTO should safeguard the interests of agricultural product trade and development objectives of developing countries, also supporting the implement of the target of the greenhouse gas emissions. And we see that the coordination between various international organizations are very much important, and building consensus, mutual understanding within the international community, the consumers, the producers, exports are extremely important. The fourth point I would like to raise here is that we support the the fifth. Vietnam remain open to adjust its policies to make the most of the opportunity and minimize the adverse impacts of multilateral trade commitments to agriculture, rural areas, and farmers, in accordance with the international commitments and relevant FTA negotiations. So these are a few points that I would like to share with you, and let me express my sincere thanks to FAO and the Geneva Trade Platform for having me at this event and for the initiative of organizing this event. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Ambassador. There was a lot to potentially engage with there. Vietnam's policies are certainly comprehensive. There is a mix of what I found especially, I suppose, inspiring is the mix of long-term strategies with that flexibility you talked about to adjust to multilateral outcomes, to make sure that anything that is done to improve the food security of Vietnam doesn't come at the expense of the food security of others, and to make sure that the international trade rules operate in that same spirit. It was an interesting echo to the comments of our FAO colleagues who talked about the need for food security that is meets the needs of today without stealing from the needs of tomorrow, if I were to paraphrase him inelegantly. So it was an interesting parallel there. But I wanted to now turn to the WTO Secretariat and to Dr. Kessie to focus very specifically on the multilateral trading system and the WTO itself. You've heard the scale of the challenge. You've heard some of what the FAO is doing, and we've just heard from the ambassador about some of the plans that Vietnam is implementing locally and some of the things it would like to see out of the multilateral trading system. But Dr. Kessie, you have the bird's eye view of what the House can do. Where do you sense there might be opportunities to fully utilize the multilateral trading system if members are so inclined?
Thank you very much. I'd like to thank the Geneva Trade Platform and the FAO for hosting this important event. I would also like to extend our thanks to Derek and the team for presenting that thoughtful paper. I think a lot of the issues raised are very important, and certainly we have been working on these issues, and obviously our members are also very much focused on those issues. I would also like to thank Boubacar and Ambassador Mai for their very thoughtful insights. So I'll try to address this issue from a WTO perspective. And to start off, I think we need to agree on what sustainability means. And I think, as Boubacar pointed out, we have to consider all the three dimensions. The environmental dimension certainly is key, and so also are the economic aspects and social aspects. And I think we need to have a holistic definition. And this is basically reflected in the positions taken by WTO members on the issue of sustainability. In a way, the agreement on agriculture also encompasses these three issues. The agreement basically explicitly refers to the environment alongside social concerns such as equity, and it underlines the importance of food security. The economic aspects is also embedded in the commitment of members to achieve a fair and market-oriented trading system. So in a way, when we talk about sustainability and taking into account the members' views on this important issue, we need to bear in mind the three aspects, not only the environmental dimension, which clearly is important, but the other aspects are also equally important to many developing country members in particular. Second, I think we shouldn't only focus on sustainable agriculture, but as Boubacar pointed out, we need to focus on sustainable food systems. In fact, in the Declaration on Food Insecurity, which was adopted at the 12th Ministerial Conference, the members expressed their determination to make progress in promoting sustainable agriculture and food systems. So while sustainable agriculture is clearly very important, we need to look at how trade matters for the food system as a whole. The report presented by Derek mentions fisheries, which from a WTO perspective is not in the agriculture sector, but nevertheless, it is very important for food security and sustainability. Trade affects all aspects of food systems, including agriculture. Recently, we have seen how energy price spikes have affected fertilizers, seeds, and transportation costs for food and farm goods. Access to services is important, whether financial services or extension services. All of this impact on food and agriculture markets. Now, third, I would like to also talk about the prospects for WTO negotiations. As we all know, at MC12, no decision was reached on the agricultural negotiations, repeating basically what also happened at Buenos Aires. Consequently, as a result of the lack of progress, both at MC11 and MC12, members are still searching for a roadmap on a number of issues that are important to the sustainability of food and agriculture. We have a number of issues on our table that members are considering they're considering the impact of subsidies on global markets, including products such as cotton, which are important for the C4 and other low-income countries, the impact of tariffs and other trade barriers, which are on access to markets and opportunities for value addition, and for export restrictions, for example, how that impacts negatively on vulnerable people in low-income countries. So there are a number of issues which WTO members are quite concerned with. As I mentioned, we haven't made progress, and that is something which has been in the uppermost of the senior management. Our Director General has actually urged members to adopt a fresh approach to the negotiations. And for that purpose, we will be convening a retreat on 24th October to see how progress can be made, how the deadlock can be broken so that progress can be made. And this is also important. I think at the heart of it, members want to make sure to be able to address adequately the challenge of improving the sustainability of food and agricultural markets. So we have a plethora of issues, and clearly, I think one of the main issues, how do we move forward? Some members have suggested that we need to focus on issues which all members can rally around, and one is sustainability. All countries agree. With the world's population expected to increase up to 10 billion, we have additional mouths to feed, but we have to do so sustainably. Now, the issue is how do we do that? And I think Boubacar and others have made some suggestions as to how. I think most WTO members are willing to engage in the discussion we are currently having. As Derek pointed out, members are engaged in the environmental sustainability discussions. There is also the fisheries subsidies deal. In agriculture, as you all know, we had two key decisions at MC12, one which is also important for food security, the exemption of WFP from the imposition of export restrictions, and also the declaration on food insecurity. In that declaration, members acknowledge that progress towards meeting SDG 2 has been undermined, and it expresses the members' determination to make progress on the objectives which that goal sets out. In addition to the agriculture decisions, we also had a declaration on SPS, which has been mentioned in terms of the area of food safety and plant and animal health. All of these important issues contribute to ensuring sustainability of food and agricultural markets. Now, I'd like to turn to some obstacles which prevent us realizing sustainable and full function markets for food and agriculture. I would suggest three. One would be the significant distortions and high levels of protection. The second is the persistent underinvestment in public goods, leading to low levels of productivity. And third, problems associated with inadequate or ineffective mechanisms for ensuring that goods traded on international markets reflect their true cost over time. Regarding high levels of protection, the OECD estimates that for the period between 2019 to 2021, total support to the farm sector stood around 1,817 billion a year. Out of that, public budgets provided close to 500 billion, out of which 294 billion went directly to producers. The OECD has also highlighted that some countries are providing negative aggregate support, which it estimates to be around 117 billion. One thing which I think has also generated a lot of debate among WTO members is the green box. As we all know, some types of support, particularly those in the green box, are clearly necessary to boost yield sustainably and are seen as not trade distorting or doesn't distort trade or production for that matter. So talking about research, pest disease control, training, agriculture extension, and advisory services. There are some members who believe we need to revisit the green box. To make it quite clear, there are those who believe that the sustainability criteria could be expanded And so that is part of the discussion going forward. As I said, we are having this retreat on the 24th, and we do hope that ideas will be generated so that we can broadly have an idea how we can incorporate sustainability issues into the negotiations going forward. So we are very much optimistic that we'll have some ideas on that. We all know that the political economy of farm subsidy reform is complex and challenging. And one important question is how to rectify the under provision of support for the delivery of public goods in low-income countries, while also establishing disciplines elsewhere on support that contributes to distorting global markets. And while budget reallocations can address the challenges associated with transfer of support from taxpayers to producers, it is not so straightforward to repurpose support which is provided in the form of border protection tariffs, etc., etc. So clearly, we need to have further discussion on that. And the WTO, we see that we have a role to play in enabling members to address these trade-offs, although we know that achieving progress is not always easy. As we have seen, the negotiations started way back in 2000, and still the last two ministerial conferences have been very disappointing to the extent that agriculture was not addressed. But as Boubacar pointed out, there are certain issues like addressing subsidy reform. I think Derek made a reference to plurilateral initiatives. I wasn't quite sure what he meant by that, but clearly plurilateral efforts could possibly help in the area of market access. But when it comes to domestic support and broader sustainability issues, I'd like to echo what Boubacar said, that without an effective multilateral framework, it will be very difficult. If you see regional trade agreements, progress has been made on market access issues. But when it comes to domestic support, it will be very difficult to envisage an effective plurilateral agreement, especially when you have some major, to have a critical mass will be quite difficult. So clearly the WTO provides the forum for progress to be made on these issues. To conclude, I think one of the difficulties that we have, in as far as I think the outlines are very clear in terms of what issues we need to discuss in the agricultural negotiations. One important thing, which obviously also had an impact on what possible outcomes we may achieve, is the linkages between agriculture and other sectors. Possibly one of the reasons why we haven't been able to make progress in agriculture is because we have been negotiating agriculture on its own. We were able to get an agreement on export competition in 2015, mainly because of the peculiar nature of that issue. But for domestic support and market access, arguably, unless there are linkages, then it may be very difficult for progress to be made. So the jury is still out, but clearly, as I said, we are waiting for the retreat. The idea is that we need to reset the agricultural negotiations. We cannot afford to ignore sustainability considerations, and we do hope that I think the members are very much conscious of the need to include sustainability issues, but how best to address that in the negotiations is something that we are basically working with members to find a very clear way forward. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Edwini. There was a lot there. All of our speakers are a massive challenge to summarize or to pick out just a few points from. But something that leapt out at me, and is perhaps showing my age in the agricultural negotiations, is near the start of your intervention, you corrected me and you said, no, we're talking about food systems, which I think it's fair to say that if you went back 10 years ago, you would not have heard the WTO necessarily talking in those terms. It wouldn't, or at least it wouldn't have been a natural correction to make. The WTO was about agricultural trade, it was about borders, it was about commodities. And I think it is telling that now sustainability and questions of food systems, the way that I know the FAO talks about these issues, has now very much entered into the DNA of the WTO, and the conversations mirror each other much more closely. So I found that I think inspiring and heartwarming that conversation is moving in that direction. I also think that you laid out the the obstacles to progress, especially on some of these difficult political economy issues, very cogently and realistically. I think everyone shares your hopes for the retreat, that it does spur members to come up with new ideas to reset the conversation. But I think it is fair to be exactly as realistic as you were about the scale of some of these challenges. And I know an ambassador from the Cairns group is on my right, who would gladly acknowledge the scale of the challenge in achieving progress in some of these issues. But I'd now like to turn to our final speaker. Facundo Combo is from IISD. And the challenge with working with IISD is that whenever you bring them a problem you're just beginning to think about, they will immediately tell you that they have 3 papers on it and have been thinking about it for 5 years. And that is exactly what happened in this case, where I turned to Facundo with a half-formed question around what could the multilateral system and the WTO be doing on these issues outside of the core negotiations. And he immediately fired back with a ream of detail and what was obviously months of thinking. So I think in this case, Facundo, you were going to present for us 2 specific case studies, examples, deep dives on 2 specific things outside of the core negotiations that the WTO might do to support progress in sustainability in food systems. So please, sir, the floor is yours.
Well, good afternoon. Let me start by thanking Dimitri, the Geneva Trade Platform, and FAO for the kind invitation to speak today to you about a new angle, I would say, or a relatively new angle to approach the issue of agricultural subsidies at the WTO. But before diving into this issue, we would like to say that at ISC, we consider that eventually WTO members, this is one of the many issues of 7 or 8 issues of the WTO agricultural negotiations. At some moment in time, WTO members will or might have to go for some sort of work program to address some of these scattered efforts that exist. I will discuss only 2 of them, the TEST and the COA, the Committee on Agriculture. So at some moment, there will be maybe a need to address this in a more comprehensive and in a more coherent way. So I will start talking about agricultural subsidies. Move to the next slide. So the first thing that I would like to say is that agricultural subsidies has largely been approached at the WTO from basically 2 angles. We can say one is the trade angle, and one is a non-trade angle or non-trade concern as it is defined. Well, the trade angle you already know just by looking at the WTO agricultural agreement. For example, the whole distinction between green box and amber box, between subsidies that distort trade and production and subsidies that do not do that, or they do so minimally in theory, is a trade distinction. It's a distinction that speaks of trade distorting impacts. And then we have food security. The dimension of food security is embedded in many of the discussions of trade negotiators at the WTO, for example, when they discuss public stockholding for food security purposes, when they discuss domestic support to cotton, food security is there. There is an angle, however, that I would say has been relatively overlooked, at least if you look at the proposals and the submissions of WTO members over the last years, you will notice that the environmental angle is the angle that has been relatively overlooked, especially when it comes to agricultural subsidies. This is, however, changing in the sense that, for example, we have a new initiative. You might have heard of the TEST, that is the Trade and Environmental Sustainability Structure Discussions. That is one of these initiatives where this year they have a work plan, and in this work plan, there is one of the issues that is being discussed, that is subsidies. Subsidies is not only agricultural subsidies, include fossil fuel subsidies. There is an issue of balance between the interest of the membership in addressing these issues. And interestingly, this TSD has served to host discussions on the environmental impacts of agricultural subsidies. For example, IST has been invited in April to present some sort of to present evidence on the environmental impacts of agricultural subsidies. Well, tomorrow we have a very interesting session specifically about that by the University of Adelaide. But what we can see here is that WTO members have started to tackle, or at least to discuss this. And the second session, interestingly, that I want to flag this issue because it's important, FAO, UNDP, and UNEP, that they are the authors of this report that you might have heard of on repurposing agricultural subsidies, were invited to deliver a presentation and to discuss repurposing agricultural subsidies. And one of the questions that I have heard specifically when we were discussing with people who are working on this area is the issue of, okay, to what extent the WTO can address or can integrate this discussion on repurposing agricultural subsidies that is taking place in many institutions, World Bank, OECD, maybe not using that exact language, but they were discussing repurposing in one way or another. To what extent the WTO can integrate these discussions? And what we find, and maybe I should move to the next slide, well, here is that the TSD can perform at least two functions, we see, and we want to be very specific and very concrete on these two ideas that we think that would be useful to think within the framework of the TSD. The first one, of course, let me tell you something, that this is an initiative that is, of course, subject to the natural processes that take place at the WTO with regard to the election of ambassadors, and also to the degree of participation and engagement of members. This is an issue, and I want to go back to the words by the director of the agricultural division of the WTO when he speaks of the concept of sustainability in a comprehensive way that includes environmental dimensions. Yes, it's important, but there are also some other economic and social dimensions that are equally important. And I think that one of the challenges that has this initiative that is very successful in discussing environmental impacts of agricultural subsidies and eventually repurposing is to attract and to engage more developing countries. If you look at the list of WTO members that are engaged, there is still a lot of, I would say, of work to be done in terms of making this conversation specifically on one angle of sustainability, that is environmental sustainability, to make this more, I would say, appealing to other members, that they will think, for example, when they think in terms of sustainability for agricultural subsidies, they also care or they are interested in the economic angle, or to what extent the public spending or the budgetary outlays are used in a way that makes sense from an economic point of view. So this is one idea that I wanted to discuss. But going back to the slides, the first thing that I put here is information sharing on the way in which WTO members have phased out environmental harmful subsidies that promote. This is a non-exhaustive list of things that we can discuss. For example, unsustainable use of water, overuse of fertilizers, increased greenhouse emissions. What we think is that the TSD, given that it's a relatively premature initiative, could be used as some sort of information sharing platform where WTO members tell others what they have done or what they are doing to phase out the most environmentally harmful agricultural subsidies. Of course, this is subject to discussions. WTO members can, based on evidence, agree on discussing maybe 2 or 3 categories, have a list, a non-exhaustive list, and then say, okay, we go for that. This is a soft approach, a relatively soft approach. There is no any sort of commitment there, but we still think that this could create some sort of, as I said before, pressure to accelerate or to create additional incentives for members to share positive experience. This is one idea. The second, we should move to the next slide, is the issue of repurposing. And going back to what extent the TSD can serve as a platform to address repurposing agricultural subsidies. Let me clarify something here, that is, repurposing can be for many objectives. We have, FAO has recently published the software report in which they discuss, for example, repurposing within the broader framework of healthy diets, or I would say public health considerations. So there are many angles to approach the issue of repurposing agricultural subsidies. These are not exclusive, but what we find is that there is some sort of opportunity to approach the issue of repurposing agricultural subsidies. I'm not speaking about support broadly, only subsidies, budgetary outlays, from an environmental perspective. And of course, as I said before, bearing in mind that different members have different degrees of interest and engagement when it comes to each of the three dimensions of sustainability. And then I want to briefly discuss, for the time runs, the role of the Committee on Agriculture. Well, you might have heard that I think it was in the Committee on Agriculture, the COA of March, if I'm not mistaken, that some members were interested in this idea of reframing one of the points of the agenda, that is COVID-19 and agriculture. And the idea was to maybe think, of course, COVID-19 pandemic continues to be, or continues to be associated with many drivers of food insecurity. But I think that the idea here was to discuss, to use the platform that the committee offers to discuss other drivers of food insecurity. For example, climate change and environment and climate change related events. So I think there is an opportunity, there is some sort of window of opportunity to maybe broaden the scope of this agenda item and invite, as it is happening, this is not, I would say, a very revolutionary proposal, for example, inviting FAO, instead of putting evidence of, for example, how COVID-19 pandemic shocks are affecting food security in different parts of the world. Well, we do the same with climate change, and we can. The idea would be maybe to open this for international organizations, for research centers, and eventually think tanks. And the idea here is to provide data and evidence on two things that we consider important to inform the discussions. We know that this is a transparency and monitoring forum. This is the function of the COA, of the Committee on Agriculture. But still, this could be useful first to illuminate us a little bit on the effects of climate change on global food security. But most importantly, and again, here is the trade policy angle of the coin, that is the way in which agricultural subsidies contribute to mitigate or exacerbate the effects of climate change on food security. And this is a key point. It's very important. You might have heard, or you might have read the speech that the Deputy Director General of the World Trade Organization, Jean-Marie Pogam, pronounced during the WTO, during the annual conference of the WTO Chairs Program, where he invited members, more than members, the WTO chairs, to think in terms of which arrangements to the WTO agricultural agreement can be made in order to support policies that are conducive to more climate adaptation and mitigation efforts, both adaptation and mitigation. So I think this is a point in which evidence and data could be useful to illustrate how agricultural policies, and more than agricultural policies, very specifically agricultural subsidies, are contributing to mitigate or exacerbate the effects of climate change on food security. And my last slide, yes, my last slide is, we consider that there is a point here that, especially in light of the way in which the current conversations between delegations take place, that it's important to start thinking every time that we discuss agricultural policies, agricultural subsidies. This is something that is more familiar to those who are involved in the production of reports, but maybe to translate this into the negotiations as well is to think every single agricultural policy in terms of trade-offs, to think in terms of trade-offs between at least 3 dimensions, to be very structured and follow the structure of the presentation. Effects on trade, effects on food security, effects on environmental protection. So we think that this is an issue that maybe has also been relatively overlooked, but evidence should also illuminate how, for example, there might be trade-offs between agricultural production and healthy soils, or other important trade-offs that help us understand the rationale of certain policies. And I just wanted to maybe finish my presentation by recognizing that, of course, these proposals always come with challenges, specifically when we are talking about a committee that is about monitoring and transparency of WTO members' policies and notifications. It's like section A and B of the agenda of the committee. Is that, of course, there is always a risk of overloading the agenda of the committee, and also blurring the role of the committee as a forum where WTO members discuss policies and, as I said, and notifications with respect to impacts on trade and production. At the end of the day, we think that the WTO has been very receptive to the sustainability concerns in the last few years in discussing many of these issues. But at the end of the day, we think that in order to move many of these conversations, we might have to find the right balance between the different, to put it in terms of the definition of sustainability, in terms of, to find the right balance between the social, the environmental, and economic aspects of the concept of sustainability. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Facundo. You can take your seat whenever you're ready. I thought that was very much on task, in that all of your options, and I think that's the best way to describe them, for what could be done in both the TESTI forum and in the COA would not require resolving some of those long entrenched disputes about what is the appropriate level for limits for subsidies in the first instance, but could do a tremendous amount of useful transparency and conversation to enlighten and inform policies as members navigate these difficult issues. Now, I promised we would have time for Q&A if I did not fail as a moderator, and I have only partially failed, so we do have time for some. Our assistants are standing up with the mics. I'd like to take at least one question from the room and at least one question from online, if we have one, Ger. I see you nodding, so perhaps we'll start with Ger and a question from online.
Thank you very much. We have received one question from an anonymous attendee, and he or she writes, "It seems that for some WTO members, mostly developed, sustainability is only understood as environmental. However, sustainability actually covers social, economic, and environmental. How to deal with that?"
Perhaps I might throw that question straight away to Dr. Kessie, if you don't mind, since I did pick you up on talking about food systems rather than simply food trade. What is the way to bring in concerns beyond the environmental into this discussion, or indeed are they there already?
I think they are there already, but I think I made the point right at the outset that we need also to focus on the social and economic aspects. So I do not think it's entirely correct to say most WTO members or the developed countries are only focused on the environmental dimension. We have seen a number of developed countries, they are all concerned about the food security situation, but obviously the proposals are quite different. But I think there is broad acceptance that sustainability does not only mean environmental, but it encompasses all the three. So going forward, we'll see proposals from members reflecting all those three issues. As I said, it's a question of, priority. For some members, certainly the environmental aspect to be more important, whereas for developing countries, the social and is more important. Food security is paramount for most developing countries. So, but I think there's broad acceptance that all the three would have to be looked at holistically. And if you have to have new disciplines, they should reflect all the three. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Kessie. Did we have a question from the room? And feel free to introduce yourself if you're not feeling shy.
Agriculture negotiator. I would have a question to the author of the report, to Derek. He made quite pertinent points, how sustainability could be enhanced in agriculture food trade. And the two first items are concerning market access related issues. So, for example, defining and calculating carbon footprint, facilitating trade of these products, and adjusting market access conditions based on the different environment cost of production. I'm wondering whether the report fleshes out what the WTO role would be in these issues, for example, to avoid fragmentation in defining these policies, you see, for example, in setting different market access conditions for products.
Derek, if Judith hands you a mic, you're welcome to take the floor. This is not how this is supposed to work, but we are a flexible platform above all else.
Well, I'll keep my response short. Unfortunately, also the report is quite short, so it's not going into great detail on some of these matters. I think it does outline some of the processes that might help that those kinds of specificities that you're mentioning that might help those to be defined, but doesn't go into the exact detail on those. I think that's more of a technical matter that's a bit beyond its scope. But thank you. It's a good point.
I guess I would add that two of the FAO's recent reports do touch on this in a little bit more detail, and they are referenced in the paper that Derek produced. So if you follow the reference rabbit hole, the answers are there, but it is a short overview paper. Thank you, Tomasz. And that, I think, brings us to the close of our session. It is, unless we have one last question, Christoph.
Well, thank you. Yes, just a quick question. Well, actually two. One is, like Edwini, I was a bit struck by the reference to plurilateral as a way forward in negotiation. So if Derek can say just a little bit what is behind it. And on Facundo's point, I think this idea of using the TESD to promote a discussion there is quite interesting. It seems to me that your approach is really looking at within the existing structure of TESD, where can we, bring in some of the sustainability issues like under subsidies. But I think that quite a number of countries would be really interested in having sustainable agriculture as one issue to be discussed under TESD. We have a work program, we have a structure, but that structure is not written in stone. As we think about the future, there might be value in having sustainable agriculture as one topic. And it goes beyond subsidies. I mean, there's a whole discussion on standards, on deforestation. So there's a wide range of issues there. And I'm sure that it would be very good also for TESD to put that firmly as an item on the agenda, as it would probably also generate a lot of interest from a wider range of members for whom this issue is really at the core of their preoccupations.
Thank you, Christoph. I might use the chair's prerogative to save this from becoming an interrogation of Derek and focus on that second question or that second comment for Facundo to see if you have any reactions to that thought and suggestion. If you could use your mic. Make sure the folks at home can hear you.
Yes, no, I fully subscribe your comment. I think that my presentation was focused more in identifying the existing spaces to discuss very specific issues. And yes, the work plan provides that the fourth section of the work plan, as you perfectly know, is about subsidies, and we are discussing one very specific form of agricultural trade policy, but yes, we fully subscribe the fact that this goes beyond and includes issues, as you mentioned, standards and also discuss sustainability. Also, not from and again, I want to go back to one of the comments at the beginning from the room, to think sustainability in broader terms, to think sustainability not only from an environmental perspective, but also to consider other dimensions that are equally relevant for, I would say, a significant part of WTO members. Thank you.
And I think that comment on I suppose the potential of these discussions and the potential of broader discussions at the WTO is a really good place for us to leave off. Thank you very much to our illustrious panel. Thank you, Ambassador. Thank you, Facundo. And of course, thank you to our colleagues in Rome and at the St. William Rapard for joining us as well. Thank you to those of you who came in person and those of you who joined online. And of course, to the FAO for being such wonderful partners on this entire initiative. This is, as we said at the outset, the first of several events, and future ones will look in detail at specific elements of what can be done around sustainability through the multilateral system in agriculture. And we hope to see you then. So thank you again and have a wonderful evening.